Good afternoon. This is March 13, 2015, and we are here to interview the Honorable Henry Frye in this very informal interview by the Archives and History Committee of the Greensboro Bar Association. And the members of that committee are Mark Gaylord, who is the camera operator, and Larry Moore, who is here, and Fred Lynn, who apparently is not able to be present. And Mark, would you like to show your camera to yourself and Larry to be in the picture?
I rotated around somewhat. It's a little awkward, but we'll do it. All right.
Here we are, as I say, in an informal interview, and I hope you don't mind my calling you by your first name.
I like that first name.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've been here in Greensboro since 1949, when you came here to the A&T State University.
Yes, it was A&T College in those days.
Yeah. And it's now the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University.
Absolutely.
So you've been here all that time, first as student and then later as you pursued your career in the law.
Yes, except for a couple of years in the military.
In the military.
And a few short months when I was somewhere else.
Okay. Well, I'll ask you a few things about
Yes.
that as we go along. Seems to me, in preparing for this interview, that you have almost a unique career that we're going to ask you about. Certainly an impressive career that covers a lot of things in our time here together. I was here in 1957. I think you came here after law school in 1959.
Well, I was here already. I never left, but I graduated from law school in '59, took the bar and passed in 1959.
Okay.
I made Greensboro my home, or continued to make Greensboro my home. Right, yes.
You have had a number of awards rendered to you, and you've been, I think, interviewed more than twice, and I've been able to determine that as I prepared for the interview.
Yes.
I know that Tom Ross interviewed you at one time, back in maybe quite a while back.
Yes, yes.
And in any event, the book that was written, your biography, is entitled Henry Frye, North Carolina's First African American Chief Justice by Howard E. Covington, Jr.
That's correct.
And it came out, I believe, in 2013, and it's an exceptionally well done biography.
Well, thank you on behalf of the person who did it, Howard Covington Jr., who I should say that I had known before then, and he knew me before then. And I knew that from his writings that he was very careful in what he had written. He'd written other books and written other biographies.
Indeed,
in
yeah.
fact. Yes. And so I felt comfortable bearing my soul to him and letting him put things into writing.
It was well done, very interesting, very detailed, with a lot of interesting anecdotes and things that have happened in your life. I've made some notes here in order to at least cover most of the things that we wanted to ask you about. It's obvious that your career has been so interesting and complete, there's no way we can cover it all today. I think you understand.
I agree with that last part especially.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about your origins. Tell me about, I believe you were raised down in Ellerby, North Carolina, outside the town of Ellerby.
Yes, that's correct.
And tell me about your family.
All right. My family consisted of my mother and father and 12 children. I was number 8 out of the 12, 6 boys and 6 girls.
Mm-hmm.
We grew up on a little farm in near Ellerby. I say on the outskirts of Ellaby. Ellaby is so small, it's a small town in the Sand Hills portion of North Carolina, Richmond County, along with Rockingham and Hamlet for people who have some feel for North Carolina. And it's the Sand Hills where it's known for peaches primarily, but also for tobacco and cotton and lots of different fruits and vegetables and things of that nature. And that's where I went to the same school from first grade or kindergarten. I can't even remember whether we had kindergarten or not in those days, but I went to that same school for 11 years.
What was the name of the school?
It was known as Ellaby Colored High School. Somewhere along the line, they named it Mineral Springs. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether that was before I graduated or after that.
Now, your father was in the farming business.
He farmed and ran a sawmill. He, first of all, he was, for those who might be familiar with sawmills, the man who does the sawing is sort of the person in charge of the mill. And so my dad had worked for somebody else's sawmill for a long time, and worked himself up to being the sawyer, and eventually bought a mill himself and ran it himself, along with others. It takes several people to operate it. But that was his other job.
And what kind of farming did he do?
Well, we raised tobacco, cotton, and all different vegetables and so forth. We did not have a peach orchard. Peach orchards were big things, and you really needed a lot of people to do that. But that was the main thing. Tobacco and cotton were our main money crops.
And did you work there with your father?
You bet I did. And all the rest of us who were there. I have to give you my dad's favorite statement when people ask me, well, how long do you work? He said, we work from Cape to Cape. Can't see when you start in the morning, can't see when you stop at night. But we worked tobacco and cotton, got up early in the morning, worked sometimes all day, and we started young.
You developed a work ethic early on, didn't you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And you kept on it up to the very moment we're sitting here talking.
Well, yes, almost. I'll just leave it at that. I'm trying to get out of it, but it's hard to get
I'm going to ask you about that later in the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Your mother, tell us about your mother.
Well, my mother did some work around on the farm, but she primarily worked at the house taking care of things there. And she was a great philosopher, even though she, as far as I know, never went to high school. But I could talk all day about things that she told us and not told us to do or not to do, and comments about various things like that were very helpful.
She had an influence on your life and your career and your objectives in life.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Did she have any in particular things in mind for you in your career?
Oh yeah, no question. She wanted me to be a preacher.
Yeah.
And my principal said that I was going to be a preacher. And of course some other folks, same thing. But and it took her a little while, but she finally became satisfied when I went a little different way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I better throw this in because it may not come up again. But my older son is a preacher. So he says he's the preacher that my mother wanted in me, and so he's the one.
That would make her happy if she were still here.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Did your father also have an influence on your work career?
Yes, but not. He didn't talk as much as my mother. At least it's around me. You never know, about that. But he acted primarily by example. And he himself worked hard because he worked 2 or 3 jobs all of the time doing something. And we complained that other folk took Saturdays off, but we didn't. We finally got him to let us off somewhere around 12 o'clock on Saturdays. But he was a hard-working person, very tough person. And I have to tell you this part. I told you about his with the sawmill and that type thing. And we hauled lumber, and not only lumber but slabs. I guess people know what slabs are. The bark, you know,
Yes.
and say you cut out. Any rate, and we always said that he could stand at the back of a truck loaded of lumber and count in his head and tell you how many feet were there, even though he had very little formal education himself. But he was able to do that and always able to get people to help, you know, working with both the mill and working on the farm at times.
So you had Saturday afternoon off, is that what you said?
Yes.
And then on Sundays, did you do the church? You had
Oh, yes, yeah.
The whole family very much involved?
Most of the
And-
time,
Mhm.
sometimes some were a little slackers, you know. But we grew up largely in the Baptist church. But just to go back to old-fashioned times, our church there, which was a small community, remember, had the Sunday school every Sunday, but we only had what we call preaching once a month. And across the street was a Methodist church, which we called Station Church.
Station church?
Yes, that meant they had service every Sunday.
Oh.
So on the Sundays that we didn't attend, and we didn't have our service at the Baptist church, we would go to Sunday school and then leave there and go over to the Methodist church. So I really attended the Methodist church in terms of time more than I did my own church.
So the Methodists welcomed the Baptists?
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you about your siblings now. I mentioned that I was going to ask you that you had 11 and you made the 12th, is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, that's correct.
And where did you fit in to the 12?
Yeah, well, I'm 8 out of 12.
Number 8?
Number 8 from the top.
So there was a
So
good bit
below
of
me then there were, what,
yeah.
two boys and 2 girls.
There
Yes.
were, the oldest child was a boy, was he? Or
The girl.
a girl?
Yeah.
And how much age difference?
Have to do some math, huh?
Approximately, I'm just
Yeah,
wondering.
she was, well, let's see, between her and me, all of us were about 2 years apart.
I see.
So I guess if, we can see, I was 8, 2 times 8 is
About
16.
16.
Mhm.
Yeah, she must have been about 14 years, I guess, then 14, 15, 16 years older than I. Yeah.
And so,
So I don't remember her until she was up at some age.
you couldn't be real close to a sibling that was that much older than you, that's right.
That's correct.
And I was particularly interested, Henry, that you have stayed right here in North Carolina.
Mhm.
And I wanted to ask you about your siblings, some of them. Did they all stay in North Carolina?
No, my older sister went to New York, in Brooklyn actually, and stayed there all of her life, died there, everything with her. My brothers, next two were brothers who are, male, were drafted. No, that's not right. My older brother was drafted for the Army during World War II. My brother, the other next brother, volunteered for the Navy so he wouldn't be drafted. And then we have my other brother who was too young for World War II, but who volunteered really to serve in the Army later on. And let's see, coming down in between there, we had Ella and Daisy, who were ladies. They left North Carolina, went to New York. That's where all of us went for some period of time. And might as well get to, the reason was you couldn't find a decent job around, Elizabeth, Richmond County. And so that's where we went,
And that was,
looking for work.
and that was typical really of families at that time. Families, say, in your situation,
Yeah.
where the job opportunities were little if any.
Yes.
And how many of your siblings or brothers and sisters stayed wherever they went, who were not continuing to live here in North Carolina?
Most of them stayed in New York, and others went and stayed a while, came back, and I remember, for people who know about the farm, we use mules, for everything. And one of my brothers said, I'm going to help get this crop in, and said, after that, if a mule got in my lap, I wouldn't tell him to get up. And he did it too. He left and he went to Brooklyn and got a good job and everything. So
He'd
he
seen
came
enough
back to
mules.
visit. Huh?
He'd seen enough of those mules.
Yes, yes. Well, the way I put it is, plowing, you're looking at the south end of a northbound mule, which is not
Yeah.
a good place to look. Or the north end of a southbound mule. Either way,
So you graduated from the school there in Richmond County, and then you went to A&T.
Yes, that was A&T College in those days.
Yeah.
And then A&T was for agricultural and technical.
What sort of financial help did you have, Henry?
Well, it was announced at graduation that I had a $100 scholarship from Sears Roebuck and Company, but I never got it.
Oh, gosh.
And I haven't figured out to this day what happened between graduation, and I was told at one point that they ran out of money, scholarship money, before they got to me. But my daddy wrote a check for $101, I think it was, which was the amount we needed to get started, and told me to give it to the bursar and tell him don't cash it until he called, or till the bank called. And that's a story within itself.
Yeah.
But we had like a week almost of getting, after I got here, for preliminaries before classes actually started. And every day I went to the bursar's office asking to see if the banker had called. And each day it was no call. And I went one day finally, about the last day I guess, and went in there and they said, well, we don't know anything. And I started to walk out, and the bursar, that's what the guy was at that time, Mr. Webster was his name, anyway. He said, is that Frye out there? And they told me, yes. He said, well, tell him to come on in here. I walked in there. He said, I just got a call from the banker in the elevator, Rockingham, I don't remember which one it was. He said, that check is good. I said, you okay? So I was ready to go. And I proceeded to finish whatever I needed to do and started going to classes. But actually, I did something different from a lot of people. I'd say some did, I guess, the same thing. I started a paper route on the campus. We had a lot of veterans at A&T at that time, and that's where I could get a little money. And then we had teachers who could afford it. Most of the students couldn't afford to buy the daily paper, but the veterans generally did. And so I started this route. I had about 60 papers, Greensboro Daily News, and every morning I delivered those papers before I went to class. And I'll tell you a good thing about it. In those days, we'd go into the cafeteria, there'd be long lines, and the students, the monitors, whichever it were, or was at that time, for the most part, they would see me coming and say, and move and let me get in the front of the line, just so I could get breakfast. Otherwise, sometimes I wouldn't get breakfast, And I remember that to this day.
You mean they're trying to accommodate your paper schedule?
Yes, yes. I'd come up, I had a bicycle, I'd come up on my bicycle with all these papers and everything. And a lot of times they'd say, well, come on up,
Were you able to finance your education by delivering papers, or did you have other
well, not
sources?
completely. My daddy sent money occasionally, and so that plus the paper route I was able to do pretty well, you know, because I collected the money. Interesting thing, and I'll get away from it, we'll come back, but some of the veterans would get their check, and I would have to catch them that same day to be sure that I got my money, because if I waited till, you know, a day or two later, sometimes some of them had already spent the money, so I had to wait sometime to.
So you had to collect for the subscription to the newspaper.
Oh yeah, oh I see. That's right. We don't do that now, do we?
Well, I don't know. I was going to ask you how you
well,
do that.
now we pay by the week, a month or something, and mail it in, and actually I pay every 6 months for my daily paper now. But then with the deliveries, I had to do it. In other words, so I got paid out of the money that I collected. If I didn't collect the money, I didn't get paid.
And you turned in the rest to the newspaper.
Well, I turned in their required amount to the newspaper, and if there was something left, which it was almost all the time, that was my pay. But I had enough to help with paying some bills and with and buying a few clothes and everything.
Now, during your stay at A&T, you went straight through and got your degree there.
Yes.
And what was your major?
Well, I started in agriculture and changed later to biology and major, and I had a double minor in chemistry and air science. And the air science was new at A&T for officer training. We had undergraduate, and then we had the officer training for the last 2 years. So when I graduated, I had a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force Reserve. And the reserve is a big part of it, because I thought at first that it meant that when I graduated, I would go straight into military service. But all it meant was I had the commission, and whenever they called me, was when I got to pay, got to go and of course get paid. That's another story. I don't know where you want to get into.
Well, when did they call you, Henry?
Well, I graduated in June 1st, I think it was, or 2nd or something like that. And I got my call to report on the 29th of December.
What year was that, Henry?
1953. Yes. So, if I just go and talk about that for a minute if I want to. So I came out, and there were 2 or 3 of us, several of us in that category. Now there were some people who were distinguished military graduates, and they went in right away. So they were good, but those of us who were just ordinary graduates, they didn't call us right away. So we had to look for work. And looking for work around A&T and around Greensboro, for me, turned out to be just looking. And so I said, well, I got to do something. So to make a long story short, I went to New York and finally found a job, which didn't require the education that I had. But I got a job paying good money and was able to make some money and save some money and everything. And one of the things I did was I applied for a job at Kings County Hospital, New York, Brooklyn, I guess it was. And they put me on a waiting list. So a few days after I got my notice to report to Texas to go into the military, I got this telegram from the Kings County Hospital telling me that they have a vacancy for me and to report, I don't know, like next week or something for duty or something. So I started to say they waited. They didn't really wait. They came open, So that was my experience with that.
So you went to New York for work, just like some of your siblings did.
Oh yeah, same
And
thing.
what did you do here in Greensboro in trying to find work? Remember anyone you spoke with or any efforts you made?
I remember one thing in particular. and that was, I read an advertisement in the paper where they were hiring salespersons. And I called and asked if they were hiring salespersons and if I could come out for an interview. And the answer was yes. So I went to this place and I sat out there and I sat and nobody came to interview me. So I asked the receptionist or somebody, told them again who I was and everything. And the person told me, wait just a minute. And the guy came out and he said, well, we're going to hire some salesmen. Said, but I didn't know you were colored. So we're going to hire some colored ones on Saturday. And I was very upset with it. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I did ask, I said, well, why didn't you say that when I called? He said, well, I didn't know you were colored. And he didn't, of course, I guess, unless he could have told by my voice or something.
Would you feel comfortable telling us who that was?
No, sir, I don't want to. In fact, I don't even remember the name. I'll tell you this now, a lot of things that happen that I don't like, I try to not to remember the person, you know, or the name or whatever it is.
Well, if I ask you anything of that nature, you just tell us.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah, okay. I don't want to have it in my mind, you know, I might run into that person or something.
I understand that. But that was not, at least looking back on it, that was not necessarily a surprise, was it? As you look back.
Well, it was a surprise. I guess I was dumb, really. But I couldn't see, you know, I thought since he had told me to come out there, and that he would have said, well, you know, we plan to hire colored or whatever you want to call us, you know, on Saturday, but since you're here, I'll go ahead and, you know, look at your application or talk to you or something, you know. But he was very rude with it, and so I figured I wouldn't want to work there anyway. So
Yeah. Good decision.
So you were called in to the Air Force, active duty, and what was your service? Where did you serve?
Okay, I was assigned, well, I need to back up. After I went into the Air Force in Texas, and then from there to, I was assigned to munitions school in Denver, Colorado. And so I was there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 months in school, learning how to be a munitions officer. And so after that, then I was assigned to Korea, to what is known as K-13. So when I went in, get my times right, this is 54, of course, 1954, yeah. In the summer of 1954, I went to Korea and started serving as the munitions officer for the base. Munitions is a word that just covers ammunition for airplanes and various things like that. And bombs, by the way. So that's what I did for a few months, I guess. And then they decided to transfer my unit to Japan. And when the time came to make the transfer, they said, we're going to have 1 officer and 1 enlisted man. And guess who the officer was? Me. So the enlisted man and myself, we got on the plane to go to Itazuki Air Base in Japan. And this I remember specifically because we were flying along, just real nice, everything going fine. And all of a sudden, it seemed that the plane just dropped about 1,000 feet, you know, and stuff kept, you know, I mean, it was something. And the co-pilot came rushing back there, and he went back and was looking and doing something. And of course, nobody told us anything. We didn't know what was going on. And finally, he started back, and the plane turned around and was headed. You could tell it was turning around and going back. So we went back to the air base, and we were coming in, and you have fire trucks on both sides. Oh boy, now yeah, I'm gonna tell you, if you haven't been in those situations, it scare you to death, you know. And somehow we landed and had almost a smooth landing, no real damage. What had happened was the brakes on the wheels, the airplane's wheels had locked or something, I don't know, at any rate. And the kind of landing was something. I've forgotten all the details except it was safe landing.
Well, in
So
all
we got up, and I got to finish that.
All right.
All right, so we of course, we got out and everything, and they said, well, don't leave, you know, you're still going today. Well, after 3 or 4 hours, you know, they said, well, we're ready to go. And I said, well, where's the plane we're going to? They said, we're going to put you back on that same plane.
Oh, gosh.
I said, oh, Lord, you don't mean that. But they did, and we had an uneventful trip, and landed in somewhere in Japan, actually, and then we had to go to our base. But anyway, go ahead, I had to get that out.
Well, I was just gonna say, in my little preparation for this interview, I didn't know we were gonna learn about your experience there on the airplane, and what was obviously a rather frightening experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So after you, and I want to ask you this, I think it was 1950 or so when President Truman ordered the integration of all the military. What experience did you have? And this was several years later when you went in, but there was obviously a great change in relations after that order from the president. What experience did you have?
Okay. Well, I'll start with the ROTC again at A&T. The Air Force, and some of my folks in the other services don't completely agree with this now. From my experience, the Air Force did a better job of integrating than any of the other services, okay? And when I say from my experience, I'm not talking about just my personal experience, but a lot of Air Force people that I talked to. So going all the way back to my ROTC training, where during the summer we went to summer camp, I could not tell the difference in terms of how we were treated. Black, white, same place, same training, and things of that nature. And it happened again when I went to Texas in the getting ready to get trained and so forth, and in Japan and Korea. Now, I knew there were differences because there were very few black officers, and especially in high commands. But as far as the Air Force was concerned, I think that it really tried to carry out what the president's orders said. That was my experience.
Yeah.
And as I said, I've talked with some others back then and up until now. And I think that the Air Force did a much better job of following the president's orders in principle. I mean, not just pretending, to do it. I'm not saying there was never anything that's discriminatory. You don't have that anywhere in the world that I know of. But those were my experiences.
I was a few years ahead of you in the Air Force during an earlier time of the order for integration, and I think I had the same experience that you're describing. I think I went in 1950 and came out in 53, and you were just getting into it at that point, I guess.
That's right. I actually went in December of 1953. Yep.
I'm not supposed to be telling anything about myself, but I thought you'd be interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I have to admit that when we were in Texas, we were fine as long as we were on the base. But then we went off the base, and we should have known better. Black and white, about 4 or 5 of us, 2 or 3 blacks and 2 or 3 whites and everything. And we went to the restaurant, and the guy said, we can serve you, but we don't serve blacks in here, or Negroes or whatever we were being called in those days. And of course, the black whites that were with us, they said, well, we'll go somewhere else and eat. So I was not treated well in that sense, in my own country. And then I get over to Japan and Korea, and they don't seem to make a difference. Yeah.
So
You're just a foreigner over there.
Yeah, right, that's what I'm saying.
Japan.
So then you finished your tenure in the Air Force, and you came back here, and then you were trying to decide what to do.
Absolutely.
Tell us about that.
I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so with my chemistry and biology background, somebody talked me into saying, you know, you could, I know what it was. I think it was a dentist here, Dr. W.L.T. Miller was a friend of mine and a dentist, and he and Dr. Barnes maybe, I'm not sure about that, but at any rate. So I went down to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and carried my transcript and everything with me, and got an appointment and went in and talked with somebody. And they looked at it and said in effect that, well, you look like you got a good grade point average and everything here, but if you would take 2 courses in, no, I've forgotten what it was, two courses that I had not had. Said if you would take those and apply, then you know, you might be able to get in, not this fall, but next year. This was in like February or March of 55. And I wasn't quite sure I wanted to do that. And so I came back to Greensboro. My friend Shirley, who was later on to be my wife, lived here, and I came back here and I talked with Kenneth Lee, J. Kenneth Lee, who I think you all interviewed earlier.
We did.
Yes. And told him about it. He said, why don't you go to law school? And I said, law school? I said, well, I talked to a few other lawyers, and they said that since I didn't have any family with, you know, with business or no legal persons or anything, said the question was, where was I going to get people to pay me and everything with it? He said, I don't pay any attention to that. They tried to tell me that, you know. And I said, well, you know what my background is, you know, chemistry and biology. He said, don't pay any attention to that. So mine was something, engineering or something, I don't know. Said,
Electrical engineering.
yeah, electrical engineering. Well, so you know more than I do.
Well,
all right,
he told us about that.
yeah, right. Anyway, he said, you would do well in law school and you'll be okay. So I got in my car and back to Chapel Hill I went, and I went to the law school. And carried my stuff, and I was kind of waiting for them to say, well, I don't know, and everything. And whoever it was said, you know, said, I think you do all right in law school. And anyway, we talked a lot and everything, and I left. And the next day, I got a letter from either the dean or assistant dean or somebody. Sent me the application, sent me the LSAT information, and very clearly it was an invitation to apply. And I said, well, maybe I ought to try this thing, you know. So the bottom line, I did, and I took the LSAT, and I passed. I don't know what, I don't think I was at the top of the list by any means, but I passed on the LSAT, and I was accepted. And so I'm ready to go to law school. Still not sure if that's what I wanted to.
I believe you made a good choice, Henry.
I did. I have no question about that. I made a mistake of telling my dentist that one day while he was in working around there in my mouth. I don't think I said something like, "I sure am glad I didn't go to dental school." And he said, "Well," and I didn't say that anymore. He didn't find it as funny as I thought it was. You know?
Tell us about your experience in law school as far as relations with faculty and students.
Generally, it was good. There were some exceptions, and with 1 or 2 students, and with that I thought with 1 or 2 professors. Let's just put it that way. But generally, I thought that they were fair in handling it, and had some great teachers. And I don't guess I need to go through naming some of them, but I'll name one or two. It was Maurice T. Van Hecke. He was just a great teacher all the way around.
He liked the Socratic method, was the way he
yes.
taught.
Yes. Oh, you know about it, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
All the professors that you had stayed on, were there when I was there, and they stayed on up to the time you were there, or even beyond.
Beyond
An
that.
old group of those professors.
Absolutely, absolutely. But generally, my experience was good. Luckily, I guess, I made an A on the first test. And people are not supposed to know who made the A's because we were using numbers. But somehow, I would think 2 hours after they posted the scores, it seemed that everybody in the class knew who made the top, who 5, 6, 7, 8, or whatever of us that made the A got it.
So the word got around.
The word got around that I was one of the top students.
And that elevated you in the esteem of all your colleagues.
Well, no, I can't say that, but in several of the colleagues, let's put it that way.
Now, I understand you were living here in Greensboro at the time and commuting back and forth to law school?
Primarily, yes, with 2 other law students. The 3 of us would drive down together. One would drive one week, another drive the second week, another drive the third week. And worked pretty good most of the time.
I read about one of them who was a member of our bar association. Do you remember who that was?
Max Ballinger.
Max Ballinger.
Yeah,
Was it really?
Yeah, he was an interesting.
So you rode down together each day and then came back?
Came back, yes. We did that the first year and some the second year. Third year, I stayed down there a lot more. I had apartment, not apartment, I had a room, and so I spent more time down there than I did the first year. First year to drive down and do and come back.
Was Julius Chambers in law school when you were there?
He finished the year that, he graduated the year that I started. I think that's correct. In other words, I finished in 59, and I think he started in 59 and graduated 3 years later. I may be off a year,
Yeah.
but
But you didn't get personally acquainted with him at that time?
Oh yeah, I did.
Oh, you
I
did?
Yeah. He and his wife came by before they got married. That's right. Not his wife before we got married, was she? He and his girlfriend, fiance, came by our house one day, one summer. I remember because he was driving a convertible. I think it belonged to his fiance. Well, she let him drive. I think that's the situation. But they came by and we talked and everything. And after that, the 2 couples became very close. And
I mean, he came by here in Greensboro. Where
yeah,
you
he came
lived.
by where we lived in
So
Greensboro.
you already knew him somehow before that?
Before I graduated from law school, yes.
You didn't overlap in the law school, did you?
That's what I'm saying. I don't think so. I think I graduated in 59 and he started in 59. Now, as I said, I think that's correct. With it, I'm getting to the age, and I don't always trust my memory.
How did you get acquainted with Julius?
Well, we ran into each other for one thing at different places. We had at that time a group called the Southeastern Lawyers Association. And while neither one of us could be members because we weren't lawyers, we both went to some of those meetings and things that there were just a handful of black lawyers, in those days. So they could meet in somebody's house, which we did sometime. And so we got to see each other like that. And I don't remember now whether we actually visited their home during while we were in law school or not. I just don't remember particularly.
So, let me see if we can move along on this. You graduated then in 1959, and then you came to Greensboro. You were already living here, of course,
Right.
but you came here to practice law.
Yes.
Tell us about that, how
Yes.
that worked.
Again, Kenneth Lee owned, he owned, leased a building, And he had an extra space in the building, and he agreed to let me have it probably for nothing for the first few months, I guess, and I don't remember the exact details, but for small rental and something. And so I opened in that building with him. And I think Major High may have been in there at the same time, another lawyer. And he let me use his secretary for a little business that I had. And when she wasn't doing something for him, he let me use her to help do things like that. That's how I got started.
So
And,
Kenneth Lee was a great influence on your life, was he not?
Absolutely, yes.
And you know, he's still living.
Yes,
And
he's
we've
still
had that
living.
interview, and so that would be an interesting thing for you to see or read about sometime, what all he said in describing his career. You set up your practice, and I guess it developed over the years, and I want to ask you a little bit more about that later, but you, I believe you were appointed Assistant United States Attorney.
Yes, yes. This was during the Kennedy years, and the Attorney General was Bob Kennedy, and Robert, and President was what? John Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy.
Yeah. But the Attorney General did the appointing. And at that time, there were no black U.S. attorneys, or assistant U.S. attorneys, or anything in North Carolina, And so I was appointed as assistant U.S. attorney in the Middle District of North Carolina. And I think one of the newspaper articles said the big question asked around the place was, where was I going to stay when I traveled around the Middle District, and where was I going to eat? Because blacks couldn't stay in the hotels in those days, most of them, and couldn't stay in a lot of the restaurants. I mean, couldn't eat in a lot of the restaurants. But
How was your experience then, as you traveled around?
yeah, well, I was careful to find out ahead of time where I could eat and where I didn't, where I couldn't.
How could you find that out?
Oh, the word gets around fast. And I had a lot of people who helped me, by the way. In every city I went in, just about, there was somebody, most of them black, but sometimes a white person who would come to me and talk to me about situations and things and how to avoid confrontations and things of that nature. And so that's the way it worked. And I remember Wilkesboro. I went up Wilkesboro, North Wilkesboro, and they had a hotel up there, and the old Wilkesboro Hotel, and they were very nice to me. I mean, they reached out and said, "Welcome, we're glad to have you. When you're up here, you're going to be, stay. You can stay here, and you can eat here every day, anytime you want to."
Was Judge Johnson Hayes then the federal judge? At that
Let's
time?
see now. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether he was still judge or not. He may have been senior status or something. I don't know. But
Well, Wilkes County was his home.
yeah, right, yeah, and I had met him. Yeah.
So, was anyone in particular that promoted your appointment as the U.S. Attorney?
Well, John Wheeler, a black guy who was from Durham, lived in Durham, who was very political and very progressive in terms of trying to get things to change, and also active nationally. And so he was, the question, well, let's back up. I know this because I checked it at any rate. But the Kennedys promised to put somebody in the U.S. Attorney's office in every southern state. And so he started in North Carolina with me.
We're talking about a black.
Yes, a black, African American, or some minority, I don't remember his exact language, and John Wheeler was the person who sort of pushed people to do what they say they're going to do. And he decided that I would be the best person to get in this position.
Did you know him?
Oh, yes, yes, sir. Well, I could spend a lot of time on that, but in those days, for a while there, I was doing, helping develop some housing for, I think it was medium to low income people. And under a federal program, which has a long name that I've forgotten the name of it now. But, his bank funded it. When I say funded it, funded the preliminaries of the development of it. And I handled the legal work for those developments. And he became very impressed with the way I handled things. And I remember, just as an example of that he sent a letter to me one time, and when I got back, and the letter was still on my desk. And I'd been gone for several days, and it had on there, "Hold for his arrival." In other words, it had my name on it and said, "Hold for his arrival." And that meant, even though we had other lawyers in the firm, that he wanted me to get it. And it was just a regular business matter relating to those things. But he developed a real confidence in me in terms of thinking that I would try to do things right.
You remember the name of his bank?
Yeah, Mechanics and Farmers Bank, which is still existing today.
In Durham?
Yeah, well, it's in Durham and Greensboro.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's another story. I don't know, we don't have time to get into that, or do we?
What, you can tell?
Well, there was no African American bank in Greensboro when I came here to practice law. I was first going to organize and do a savings and loan. Kenneth Lee beat me to it. And by the way, I had helped him with selling subscriptions to it and things of that nature. So then I decided to organize a bank. And I have to, let me go back and tell you one of the things that really impressed me. I went to Durham and went to this, I don't remember what I was doing there, but there were several black businesses. There was North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, there was Mechanics and Farmers Bank, there was Mutual Savings and Loan, and a fire, some kind of fire insurance company or something, as I recall. And I walked in there and I saw all these black people dressed up, for going to lunch and all that. I'd never seen that before, anyway. And we didn't have that in Greensboro. And I said, boy, this is, black folk are doing pretty well down here. We ought to do something in Greensboro. And Kenneth Lee agreed 100% with me. In fact, he was ahead of me in terms of trying to do things, like that. And so I said, after he organized the savings and loan, I said, I would do a bank. My wife said that's the only thing that I've ever done that she couldn't understand, how in the world I was going to organize a bank and I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
But I got 8 graduates of A&T and one other person and 1 or 2 others. And we somehow came up with enough to get the subscriptions out and that type thing. And we finally opened Greensboro National Bank on November 2nd, 1971. And we opened in what amounted to a house trailer. And I remember one lady that I asked about, who I knew fairly well, about making a deposit in the bank. She said, I'm not going to put my money in that thing. The wind come along and blow that trailer away and my money will be gone.
Where was the trailer located?
Located at the corner of Morrow Boulevard and East Market Street.
At East Market, I remember.
Right, yeah. Right. And after a short while, we had 2 trailers. And a little while later, we had a building. And I'll give you another experience. We wanted to get the black contractors involved in building and things of that nature. And we didn't have a black general contractor in Greensboro that we could use. So the bank decided to be its own contractor. And we had what we called a I think, was something, clerk of the works, I believe, or something like that, we called him, to coordinate the thing. And so we got black subcontractors for several things, and then we had to get where we could find for the others. And that's how the building was done. And I found out that the problem with trying to be a general contractor was bonding. The black group could not get bonding, and if you couldn't get bonding, you couldn't have a big business, you know, to run. And so that was a very difficult thing, and it still is somewhat difficult, not as easy, I mean, not as hard now as it was back then. But we got it built, and the building's still there, and we merged later on with Mutual Savings and Loan, and then eventually Mechanics and Farmers Bank. And so it is now a branch of Mechanics and Farmers Bank.
And you were an officer in the bank.
I was president.
President.
I was president for 9 years while practicing law and on the board of North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company and doing public things. And I don't know how in the world, looking back, I don't know how in the world I did everything I was doing at that time, and still had time to call my boys on Friday night, well, not Friday night, during the week, and take them to play basketball and soccer and all that stuff, you know. But I did.
Did you have any support or help in the investment for the bank from the white community?
Oh yes, yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Tom Stowers with let's see, what was Tom Stowers? What was he with at that time?
NCNB, I bet.
Yeah, NCNB, and later, guy with Wachovia, I've forgotten his name right now, but both helped us a great deal in getting things started. And in fact, I think that they may have talked to some of the other bankers about, you know, help these people, don't hurt them. I mean, I don't know what, obviously to this day, I don't know what he said. But they helped us in various ways. And some of them bought stock. I think North Carolina, did they buy some? I think they bought some stock, but I don't know, I better leave that alone. But North Carolina Mutual bought some stock, and several white people bought stock in the bank. And I told them that, by the way, by this time I'm in the legislature. I got elected to the legislature.
I'm going to ask you about that.
Yeah, we'll do it. But somebody asked me about the bank that I was organizing. I said, I understand it's a black bank. And so I wrote a little poem, and I've forgotten the rest of it, but I said, it's not black, it's green. And we had several blacks several whites in addition to blacks who put money into it, and we did okay. Not a big bank, obviously, you know, but to me that's one of the best things that I did, because it helped to have blacks who were not involved when I started to any real good sense in the big banks or anything of that nature. Now, I'll tell you one other thing that is worth noting, and I won't name any of them, but one or two places where we found blacks doing well, and I talked to them about coming to help get the bank started with this bank, and it wasn't long before they were promoted.
They were what?
Promoted.
Promoted.
Yeah, and this one, which was it was a primarily black bank in Richmond, Virginia, and we had worked out an agreement. This guy was vice president, and who was going to come in and run the bank for us. And after I had the offering circular prepared and ready to circulate, he called and came to see me and said, in effect, that I can't come. And he said, I'll have to explain to you later or something, you know, with everything with it. And wasn't long before he was the president of the bank. So I think we got him promoted too. So it wasn't just racial, you understand. But it was tough. But and some people who bought stock thought that they could come in and say, well, I part of mine back or something of that nature. And I said, well, I thought we put in writing and told you, you know, that with the stock you can't, and it's not like a deposit where you can come draw some of it out, you know. But I think that the bank helped to educate people in a lot of ways about how things work and things of that nature. And I think we helped also with the way blacks were treated in some of the other banks. So I feel good about it.
And you should, rightly so. Let me just go ahead and ask you then about some other things that you did while you were practicing law. You had a law office, and you organized this bank, and then you were also serving as a professor down at North Carolina Central.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was a couple of years. Actually, that occurred when I left the U.S. Attorney's Office. I taught for 2 years at North Carolina Central, frankly, while I was trying to get my law firm reestablished. So Walter Johnson and I formed a partnership and started the law firm after I finished that. But then it was during that time that I started doing some preparation for organizing the bank. Yeah.
Who were some of the lawyers that were practicing with you?
Yeah. Walter T. Johnson Jr., then he was just Walter T. Johnson now, because he has a son who is junior, and he's no longer practicing law. Walter,
yes,
the senior, is not practicing.
And he is the husband of Yvonne.
Yvonne Johnson, yes, right, yeah. Duke law graduate, but also E&T graduate. And then Ronald Barbee, who is still practicing. And I'll tell you a word about that. I called the dean at North Carolina Central Law School, and I said, who's your best student that you graduated this year, who passed the bar and everything? And he gave me a name, and I said, well, now, is this your top student? He said, well, no, but said, you can't get the top student. Said he's going to Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, I think it was, to practice law, And I said, well, I asked you who the name was. I didn't ask you to decide whether we could get him to come practice. And I had to pull it out of him. I knew him, well. And I said, will you give me the name of the guy, And so he finally gave it to me. He said, but you're wasting your time talking to him, At any rate, to make a long story short, that was Ronald Barbee. And I'll try to see if I can make this short. I arranged for Ron Barbee and his wife to come to Greensboro one Sunday. And so I left his wife, Alice, with Shirley. And Shirley took her around and everything, like that. And Walter and I took Ron, and we took him to our office. Now at that time, this was in probably around the early 70s, I guess, or 69 or something. I don't remember exactly when it was. But we had set up an office in the southeastern building on the 8th floor with, we got an architect to design it. And really, some of the lawyers were coming in to see this fine office that we had. We borrowed money and everything to fix it up, and it was really, really a nice office on the 8th floor of the southeastern building. And so we took Ron in there, and we went in the library. We had this library with all these books and things, and everything. And to make a long story short, we told him what we were interested in, we'd like to have him, and so forth. And he said, well, I'm planning to go to Pittsburgh and everything. I said, well, think about it. Don't worry about it. Make a long story short, he and his wife got to talking about it, and I think his wife wanted to come to Greensboro. And eventually, not eventually, but a few days later, they called back and said, well, you know, if you'd still like to have me, I'll do it. And so they moved to Greensboro, and he was a sharp lawyer. I don't know if he still is or not, but he was something boy. And I have to tell you this because we're talking to lawyers. Walter and I we thought pretty good lawyers, you know, we thought we knew the law. So we'd be sitting in the library talking about this case, and we'd say, this is what the law says, this is it. That's, you know, Walter and I'd be arguing, and Ron would walk in, and I said, Ron, we got a little argument here as to what the law is. He said, I said, Ron, tell us, what is the law? You just got out of law school, tell us. He wouldn't say a word. He'd walk over to the books and he'd find a book of the case, you know, right on point, and come back and he would open it and read it to us. That boy was, I'm gonna tell you, he was sharp. Now, he really was. He was good. Yeah, yeah. By the way, he went on to become a Superior Court judge.
Yes.
We were Democrats. He was a Republican, by the way. Appointed by Holzhauser as a Superior Court judge. Served for, I guess, about 4 years or so, and he's back practicing law. I guess now he's doing well and doesn't have to work too hard.
He got so used to being a judge that after he went back to practicing law, when a deposition or in another trial, I or Steve Smedley would make an objection, and he would say, "Overruled."
Tell us about other lawyers that were associated with you in your practice.
Well, we had one, unfortunately, not unfortunately, well, first of all, one who was very good. And what was his name that day in the morning? Anyway, the bottom line is, this is Gervais, Tom Gervais. Very good lawyer, very promising everything, and I'm sorry to say that he committed suicide. Or at least that was the conclusion, and that really hurt us a lot, you know, everything with it. We had another one, Randall Robertson, who was very good and really doing great, and then Texaco offered him a really good job down in Texas, and he left and went with them. Stanback down in Durham, who's became a judge, and then his district, I guess he's still, you know, district attorney down in Durham, was with us. And I think I've forgotten what he did first when he first left, but we've had lots of different lawyers who worked with us. But for the most part, only one, maybe two of them actually became named partners. But they were working with us. So we had a lot of them that, and for one, you know, who left, usually for something better.
Henry, you know that you keep referring to Ken Lee, and of course he was one of the first black students admitted to the UNC Law School in Chapel Hill, and he came from NC Central. And I was going to ask you this, since you taught there for a couple of years. Can you tell us how do you compare what the school was like then as opposed to the UNC Law School that you had attended? You ever thought about that and how they compare?
Well, there was a case that dealt with that. Back in those days, those were the days of I say so-called separate but equal, and the blacks were turned down from the University of North Carolina. You know, and then because of their race, and there's no question about that. And they said that North Carolina Central Law School was equal to UNC. Well, they had a trial on it. And the facts that were found from the testimony was that it was not equal.
This is
back a long time ago now.
This was Ken Lee became one of the parties plaintiff,
Yes.
and he told us a lot about this when we interviewed him.
Yes.
And he described how things were when he was student at NC Central, as opposed to how they were at UNC Law School. And he made a very graphic description of the differences.
Yes.
Well, what I was asking you
well,
now is,
I need to say one thing about it. That he probably said, I guess, that most of the teachers at Central were part-time in addition to their jobs at UNC. Do you see the difference?
Yes,
And,
yes, he told about that too,
yeah,
as well as
yeah.
some Duke,
oh, yes,
law
right,
attorneys
yeah,
provided.
one or two Duke people. So it was clearly not equal. I mean, and of course the courts so found eventually.
Well, that's going back now, when he was involved, a few years before you came along.
Yes.
What I'm asking you to do is to compare the UNC Law School when you were there as opposed to NC Central when you acted as when you served as a professor. Have they become more equal or not?
Well, in some ways, yes, but it did not have a lot of things that they had at UNC. And they had to make me a full professor to start, as a beginning teacher, in order to pay me what a decent salary. I'll leave it at that, right? And so they just weren't, I will say that I think the school was becoming a quality school, and it is a quality school today. But they also took students then that could not get in some of the other law schools. And still, well, I don't know, I better not say what it is now. I would think that they probably take a few now, not too many, because of the bar passage situation. And but there was a difference, with it. But in terms of teaching and in terms of having good teachers, in terms of giving the support and that type of thing, Central does a great job. And I can speak almost personally about it because my son and granddaughter graduated from there, and both of them are doing real well. And both of them passed the bar on the first try, so, yeah. And they got some good experiences, different experiences of that nature, yeah.
Julius Chambers became dean of the school at one time, did he not?
Yes. But wait a minute, now, was he dean or president?
Perhaps he was president.
He was president of Central, that's what
I
he was
see.
president, yeah, he became.
I misspoke on that.
President or chancellor or whatever, chancellor, I guess was the correct title at the time
Yes. I
he
believe
came
you're
along,
right.
yeah.
So
And I
stand
don't mind
corrected.
saying I helped to try to convince him to come and do that. And boy, he really helped the unit,
I'm sure he did.
North Carolina Central, not just the law school, but the whole thing,
Yeah.
raise its level. Because he was able to get money where some folks couldn't get it. And Julius Chambers knew how to get money to get something done. Yeah.
Let me focus you a little bit on your political career. And I think back, you first ran for the House of Representatives here from Guilford County.
In 1966, no African American had been elected to the North Carolina General Assembly, House or Senate, in 66 years. Okay. So some blacks had run, but didn't get elected. And some of us thought that we need to change that. So I went to Dr. B.W. Barnes, my dentist, and told him I was thinking about running for the legislature and wondered what he thought about it. He said, son, if you run, I'll raise the money for you. And he did. And everywhere I went, people told me they were going to vote for me. But I lost. Actually, we were doing at large at that time. And we only elected 6 representatives at that time. And I came in number 7. I'll tell you, I bet you can't guess who was number 6. Jim Exel.
We've interviewed him, and I think he told us.
Oh, he
that.
did, yeah. He came in number 6, and I was 7. Well, at any rate, then 2 years later, I ran and won. And after that, it was easy. I just elected one time right after the other, and until I decided to, till I got tired of the House and ran for the Senate and won that. And then I said, after, I didn't like the Senate, I really tell you the truth. I decided to come on back to Greensboro. When I say come back, I mean,
Yes.
leave at the end of my term. And really pay attention to my practice of law. I practiced the whole time, but I had a lot of credit cards and big debts and all that way. So I said, I'm gonna make some money and pay off all my debts and then decide whether I'm gonna run for governor or lieutenant governor or what. And a few weeks later, the governor called me.
Now, you were still in the House of Representatives when Governor Hunt contacted you about the Senate.
No, he didn't have anything to do with me running for the Senate.
He did not.
No, it was only after I had completed my term in the Senate that there was a vacancy going to occur in the Supreme Court. And he called me and said he'd like to appoint me. Called me on one night and said who it was that was going to announce his resignation from the court, that he wanted to appoint me and he wanted to make the announcement before it got in under the dome. Under the dome was a political columnist in the News and Observer who seemed to always know ahead of time who was going to be appointed to something. And the governor said he wanted to appoint me before it got in under the dome. So he said, call me before breakfast in the morning. And so I talked to my wife and 2 sons and called him the next morning and said, I accept. And that's how I got on the Supreme Court.
That was Governor Hunt.
Yeah.
And
I saw him yesterday at the Greensboro Coliseum, stepping up to the ticket booth right beside me, buying tickets at the window there. Stepped right up there, right beside me, and I told the fella, "You know who that fella is to your left, right there?" He didn't, because he was from out of state, but it was Governor Hunt there. But good.
so you were then appointed by the governor to the North Carolina Supreme Court,
Yes.
and that was about what time? Can you?
Okay. That was in January 1983. Yeah. Took the oath on February 3rd, 1983. And I could talk a lot about the background for that, but let me just tell you one of those things that was of interest. I said, Governor, I appreciate the appointment. I said, but it would take me 2 or 3 months to kind of wind down my law practice and everything. And that's when he told me that, said, well, the court meets again on February the 3rd, and I would like to have you on the bench when the court meets. And I said, well, no way in the world I can close out my practice in 2 or 3 weeks, you know. He said, well, you can close out part of it and give it away to somebody and sell some of it to somebody and work at night even after you get on the court for a while. And to make a long story short, when that man made up his mind about something, I mean, he could really convince you to do it. And the bottom line is, when the court convened on February the 3rd at 9:30 that morning, I think that's when, 10 o'clock, whenever it was, I was on the bench with him. But Lord have mercy, you talking about work between the time he called me and that time, trying to close out a practice of many years and everything. But anyway, we got
You did it well. I'd like to ask you about some of your experience in the Supreme Court. First of all, I want to ask you about your colleagues. How were things with you and your judicial colleagues?
Well, they all welcomed me and to the court and offered to be of assistance. One person in particular was very helpful. All of them helped in some way or other, but Harry Martin, who was on the court, he's an old mountain man, Harvard graduate and all like that, you know. And he was, I mean, he kind of babysat me. I guess that's a good way to put it. And I remember the first case that I wrote while I was on the court. I got so disgusted with it myself, trying to get it right, you know, and everything. And I finally just circulated it without myself being 100% convinced that it was right. And I figured, you know, I could work on it a little bit more, but everything. And the messenger always takes your opinions around, circulates it to the court. And about 5 or 10 minutes after he circulated it, Harry Martin came to my office with my opinion, and he had red marks on every page. And he said, I would suggest that you have the messenger to pick up all the rest of them before they get to read it. And guess what? I called the messenger and had him to pick them up before the rest of them got to read it. And I worked on that opinion and got it, you know, a lot better, and checked it out with Harry before I circulated the next one. And it really was a lot of help to me, because I had never been a judge. I hadn't been a district court, superior court, court of appeals, or anything. I've been practicing law. I had been a person who was
An advocate.
Advocate on one side or the other, and it was a little different thing to all of a sudden switch over and try to write something that was neutral, in the sense that even though you end up ruling for one party, you have to carefully say what you're going to say, because as I told my clerks on many occasions, that, you know, 100 years from now, when people read this, they'll look back, they won't know who my clerk was. They'll see my name written on there, you know. So, but Harry was really a lot of help to me. He's still living, by the way.
He and I are from the same hometown,
Oh, is that right?
and I've known him a long time. He's been occupying a number of judicial positions, one of which was the Chief Justice, I believe, of the Cherokee Indian Nation.
That's right. Right.
And,
Yes.
so anyhow, a wonderful man. While you were on the Supreme Court, were there any opinions that you wrote, that maybe one or two that you would like to tell us about, that you felt significant?
Well, since the boss seemed to think it was significant, the first year I was on, one of my, I guess, most popular or unpopular, depending on which side you owned, was a case called Meiselman against Meiselman, civil case out of Charlotte, where the corporation rules applied. And it was a really tough case. And from the arguments and from what I'd read, I was interested in it. So I picked it, my first case. And the others looked at me as if to say, you know, why are you picking this case in the first case? You could have got this in your last pick, because nobody wanted it. And the public generally doesn't know that, you know. And by the way, I just mentioned, take 1 minute to talk about how we did cases. At the end of the week, we knew how people were going to vote, and so we would pick. In other words, where you stopped the last time, the next person would pick first, and he would say, well, I'll take this case. And usually the first pick, it would be if it's a per curiam, or either one that's very short and easy, you know, or something like that. And then the next one would be a little bit more difficult, and then if you had a third one, I mean, that was really a tough case, you know, to write. And Meiselman was on everybody's list except me. Was on everybody's list except my list as the last case to get. We call it Hobson's choice. And but I wasn't thinking about difficulty. I just picked. That was my first pick, and then I got a couple of other cases after that. And they told me about it later after the picking was over. Said, "Henry, we're surprised you took that one first. You could have gotten that one it could have been left with you and you would end up, you know, you didn't have it would have been Hobson's choice. But I worked on that thing the whole summer. When I say I, not only me, but my clerk, we worked on that thing the whole summer. And because there was a lot of the issues were not, I mean, the issues were clear, but how North Carolina should treat it was not clear. And North Carolina didn't have a lot of law dealing with that area. And so it was a real tough case to write. And it was written up in newspapers and various things and legal things all over the country. And then, by the way, and for a long time they were teaching it in corporations or in what do you call it? And courses dealing with corporations and things of that nature.
Had to do with minority sharedholders interested,
Right.
did it not?
Yeah, and the rights had to do with the rights of the minority shareholder. And at that time, didn't have much in the law to tell you what those rights were, as against the majority stockholder. But that was probably the one. There's another one, the name of which escapes me now, except that I remember that the Court of Appeals had decided the case. It was another civil case. They had decided it, and when I read it, I said, there's no way in the world the legislature could have meant what it said in the statute. I said, having served in that 14 years, I knew that we sometimes did things that were not understandable and everything. But anyway, and I picked that case to write it. I forgot now. It had to do with something about interest. And I went back and searched the legislative history from the time the bill was introduced and all the changes that took place and all that, everything with it. And I got the court finally to agree with me. Before it had been, I think, a 6-1 vote the other way. And everybody, if I recall, went along with it in the end. So that was a victory for me because I just, having served in the legislature, I just knew there's no way that the legislature would intentionally pass law saying what it said.
You don't remember the name of it,
I
but
can't remember.
But if you think of it while we're here together, you can tell me anytime. I overlooked asking you about your experience in the House of Representatives when you first got there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was the literacy issue was something that was foremost in your mind, was it not?
Yes.
I'm kind of jumping around a little bit,
All right,
but
that's all right.
let me ask you this. After you got out of the Air Force and came back to Greensboro, is that when it was that you sought to register to vote?
Yes, yes.
And tell us about that.
All right. I went back to my hometown of Ellaby to register and vote. In those days, there were only a few days a week, not a week, a few days during the time when you could register to vote. And so this was a Saturday where you could register. And so I stopped to register to vote on my way to Greensboro to get married. And I went in to register, and the person started asking me questions about naming certain presidents of the United States and naming various other things. And I said, well, I don't know, but why are you asking me these questions? And in essence, he said, well, it's in the book. And he pulled out a little book. I wish I'd asked him to let me read them myself, but I didn't think about that. And I said, well, as I understand, all I'm supposed to be able to do is be able to read and write the Constitution to the satisfaction of the register. By the way, that was, I think, either was or had been taken out, the part about satisfaction of the register. So I thought that's what he was going on, But anyway, to make a long story short, I could not pass the literacy test. So I left and got to thinking that what was he going to say when I contested this? And I went back in. I said, I want to be sure you understand that I'm a resident. Oh yeah, I know you're a resident of Ellaby. I know your family. Start naming my mother and father and everything. And I said, tell me again why I can't register. And he went back and started back through it all. Anyway, so I left. And the minister who was going to perform the marriage ceremony was going to Greensboro at the same time, so he went in, he's black, and he had got the same treatment, so he couldn't register. So the two of us met up in Greensboro, and at any rate, I won't go through all that, but when I got elected to the legislature, my first bill was a bill for a constitutional amendment to abolish the literacy test as a requirement for voting. And I could take an hour to talk about it, but I'll take 3 minutes and just say that it was thought to be by some the bill less likely to get through either house. But we got it through the House and got it through the Senate and put it on the ballot. But now before I say that, let me say that just in terms of procedure, I had a book, it was a telephone book by Southern Bell at that time that had the names and pictures and addresses and phone numbers of every member of the legislature. So for the House, which is where I was, I had 3 columns in terms of the bill. Yes, no, question mark. And I talked to every member of the House and put them in one category or the other. And when I was sure that I had enough to pass the bill, I had it brought to the floor of the House. And we had quite a debate about it. And I didn't mention the word race at all in introducing it and talking about it. And I just talked about why we didn't need it. And one legislator got up and said, well, it didn't have anything to do with race. That's what I was waiting on. And when he finished, I said, well, let me give you a personal example. And I told him about my not being able to register to vote, and the guy who married me, who performed the ceremony, who was a college graduate and everything, and he couldn't pass. And somebody called for the question, voted, and that took care of it in the House, sent it to the Senate. Okay, we got over there, somebody said, well, they're gonna kill it in the Senate. So I talked with a legislator that I had confidence in, and he told me which committee to send it to, and he would tell me when to bring it up. And the bottom line is, the committee chairman later on told me, he said, Henry said, I'm not gonna give it, we're not gonna give it a favorable report, said, but I will get it onto the floor of the Senate. So they sent it out without recommendation, you know. And I thought they were gonna kill it, but they didn't. And they got I got more of a vote, of plurality in the Senate than we did in the House. And that's sort of the way the Senate operated, you know. They would either do something or not do it, you know.